I can no longer remain silent about my father. The words ripped from Princess Beatrice's throat like a scream in the middle of battle. The press room detonated. Cameras fired in blinding bursts. Reporters surged forward, microphones thrust at her like blades. Security lunged to hold the barricade as the roar of voices crashed through the hall. Beatrice's chest heaved, her hands trembling as she clutched the podium. They have destroyed him. They stripped him of everything. Her voice cracked, but the words cut like shrapnel. Gasps rippled across the room, colliding with the shouted questions of a dozen reporters. "Are you accusing the Queen?" one barked. "Is this an attack on William and Charles?" another screamed. The chaos rose until it was deafening. Outside, London boiled. Hundreds pressed against the palace gates, banners raised, their chants like a war drum. Justice! 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 The metal barriers shook as fists pounded them. Smoke from flares bled into the night sky, glowing red like the city was on fire. Police shields locked into formation, but the crowd pushed harder, bodies slamming into steel. Sirens wailed as reinforcements poured in. Inside, the storm only grew. "You all wanted a villain." Beatrice's voice rang out above the noise, shaking. "You got one. But the villain isn't only him." For a heartbeat, the room froze. Then pandemonium. Reporters surged like a stampede. Chairs toppled. A camera crashed to the floor, its lens shattering with a sharp crack. Beatrice staggered, her vision blurred by tears and flashbulbs. A security officer reached for her arm, but she jerked free, slamming her palms against the podium. "This isn't justice, it's execution." Her words ripped the air open. The crowd outside erupted in response, their chants rising into screams. Fireworks exploded overhead, sending sparks cascading over the police line. A protester hurled a bottle. It shattered against a shield with a sharp crack. Officers retaliated, batons swinging, bodies colliding. Horses reared, hooves pounding the ground like thunder. Inside, Beatrice's bodyguards snapped into action, forming a human wall around her. They shouted commands as the press shoved harder, arms stretching over shoulders to shove microphones into her face. Questions blurred into noise. What did she mean by execution? Is the monarchy finished? Does she stand against the Queen? Her breathing came fast, almost choking. She forced the words past the lump in her throat. "You've seen the headlines. You've seen them erase him. You've watched them cut my father down. But you haven't seen the truth." Her voice faltered, then hardened. Behind those palace walls, they don't protect family, they protect themselves. The press room howled. Reporters shouted, chairs toppled, lights crashed, sparks spitting across the floor. Security shoved back the swarm as Beatrice's words exploded across every screen in Britain. Breaking news. Princess Beatrice in tears, accuses monarchy of betrayal. Live footage. Clashes erupt outside Buckingham Palace. Speculation mounts over palace split as Beatrice breaks silence. The air was suffocating, hot with sweat and chaos. Beatrice stumbled as camera flashes blinded her, mascara streaking her face. But she pushed on. They destroyed him because it was easy. Because it was convenient. Because the monarchy cannot bleed for one man, even if he's their own. Glass shattered. Security dragged her toward the exit as voices boomed. "Do you fear exile? Are you the next target?" Outside, the roar was worse. Sirens, hooves, chants of thousands screaming her father's name. Protesters clashed with police, smoke filling the streets. By the time armored doors slammed shut around her, Beatrice was sobbing. But the war she had lit raged on. Within hours, the world turned its gaze to Prince Andrew. What they saw was not a prince, but a man dragged through a battlefield. Headlines struck first. Disgraced Duke exposed. Beatrice breaks down over fallen father. Corporate sponsors shredded contracts. Pitch at palace collapsed overnight. By morning, his empire was a hollow shell. At Windsor, his residence grew silent. Staff disappeared, offices emptied. Andrew drifted like a ghost, medals packed away, uniforms hidden. Helicopters circled as furniture and paintings were carried out. Rumors of him selling estates spread like fire. Worse than financial ruin was his erasure. Inside the palace, his name was taboo. Charles declared, "He has no place in the future." William agreed. The Queen listened, her silence heavier than words. This was Andrew's battlefield, a family that abandoned him, a country that despised him, and a daughter who cried to the world on his behalf. And every hour, the fire burned hotter. Protests erupted across London. Crowds filled Trafalgar Square, chanting with venom as effigies burned and smoke coiled into the sky. Police clashed with demonstrators, bottles shattering against riot shields. Across the city, graffiti screamed in crimson, "No prince above the law. The monarchy is rotting." Inside Andrew's chambers, the noise was inescapable. Screens replayed Beatrice's trembling words, her face in anguish, her voice breaking, "They have destroyed him." The sound cut like a blade. His own daughter was both shield and weapon, defending him while exposing his ruin. He hurled the remote against the wall, plastic shattering as batteries scattered. But the cameras never left. Journalists camped in the rain, lenses fixed on flickers of light. Drones buzzed overhead, catching him pacing at midnight, gaunt and pale. He was hunted, and the hunt had no mercy. The monarchy sharpened its blade. Charles's slimmed-down crown accelerated overnight, names erased, titles stripped, Andrew's place in history deleted. The palace machine, mechanical and cold, moved forward without him. Yet the fallout bled onto his family. Beatrice and Eugenie were hounded, paparazzi flashing into tear-streaked faces. Headlines sneered, "Daughters of disgrace." Social media mocked their every step, every smile a mask against humiliation. Sarah Ferguson stood alone in defiance. Mocked as Fergie the Fool, she still snapped at reporters, "He is still family." For her, surrender was unthinkable. But Beatrice's words had unleashed something uncontrollable. The image of a princess in tears accusing her family of betrayal seared itself into history. The monarchy was no longer untouchable. Andrew sat in silence, haunted by her voice. "I can no longer remain silent about my father." The fire she lit could not be put out. The storm had only begun. And behind the palace gates, floodlights glared on a fortress cracking from within. Scandal no longer stayed outside. It poisoned every corridor, every meeting, every whisper. The monarchy itself had become a battlefield. Charles moved first. At Clarence House, smoke hung in the air as he slammed his fist on the table. "The monarchy cannot bleed for Andrew," he declared. For years he had preached a slimmed-down crown. Now he wielded it like a weapon. Andrew's name was erased from calendars, his roles redistributed, his presence scrubbed. "He is done," Charles said coldly. Advisers nodded, pens moving like executioners sealing a sentence. At Kensington, William was no softer. Pacing the floor, fire in his voice, he spat, "The people don't forgive weakness. If Andrew drags us down, the crown falls." His youth showed not in charm but in anger, hardened by a lifetime of scandal. To him, one sacrifice could save the rest. But the Queen was the wall between blood and duty. At Windsor she listened as Charles pressed for exile, William demanded control, courtiers whispered of survival. Her silence was heavier than their voices. Finally she spoke, "No one is above the crown. Not even my son." The chamber froze. A mother had condemned her child. Factions stirred in the palace's shadowed halls. Some royals muttered at the brutality, and worked silently with clenched jaw, elders whispered, "If she can strip her son, who is safe?" The answer came cold and final, no one. The crown would protect itself first. Always. The palace grew suffocating. Doors slammed, whispers sharpened, staff avoided eye contact. Even the portraits of long-dead monarchs seemed to sneer at the living, fractured heirs of a dynasty now at war with itself. And then came the betrayal. Someone inside the palace leaked the meetings, and headlines exploded. Charles leads purge. William furious. Palace split. The monarchy's war was no longer private, it was bleeding into the public eye. Security tightened. Phones were checked, guards rotated, Whispers filled the corridors. The palace felt less like a home and more like a fortress under siege. Outside, protesters carried torches, chanting louder, "Down with Andrew! Down with the crown!" Some held signs with Beatrice's tear-streaked face, her words scrawled beneath, "They destroyed him." William's fury deepened. "Cut deeper." "No weakness," he snapped. Charles nodded, grim. The Queen stayed silent, her eyes fixed on portraits of ancestors who had ruled through plagues and wars. They all knew the truth. This was not scandal, it was survival. Beatrice's announcement had turned the monarchy inward, forcing it to devour itself. Andrew was gone, erased, but his shadow lingered, proof that the crown's greatest threat was not outside, but within. And as the palace walls shook with arguments, secrets, and betrayal, one truth became undeniable: the monarchy was at war with itself. And in wars like these, there were no clean victories, only sacrifices. Beatrice had become a hunted figure overnight. Every time she stepped outside her apartment, the air cracked with camera flashes. Every street corner became an ambush. The paparazzi screamed her name as if it were a curse, shoving microphones in her face, demanding she explain the words she had already bled to the world. "What did you mean by execution? Are you accusing the Queen? Are you siding with your disgraced father over the monarchy?" Each question hit like a bullet, each headline carved her deeper. At night, the chaos followed her. Crowds of reporters camped outside her windows, their lenses trained like rifles on the flickering lights within. Helicopters rattled overhead, their searchlights cutting through her curtains. She barely slept. When she did, it was shallow and violent, her dreams filled with pounding fists on palace gates, her father's voice drowned out by jeers, and the unrelenting sound of her own words, "I can no longer remain silent about my father." Her days spiraled into torment. Social media was ruthless, dissecting her every gesture. Supporters praised her bravery, but the hate burned louder. Trolls branded her daughter of disgrace, memes mocked her tears, digital posters painted her as a traitor. Strangers shouted insults in the street. The monarchy's silence was deafening. They did nothing to shield her, leaving her exposed to the wolves. Beatrice's breaking point came quietly at first. She sat in her private study, piles of newspapers spread before her like a battlefield of ink and accusation. Each front page carried her face, her father's disgrace, the monarchy's fracture. She stared at them until her vision blurred. Her fists clenched, her nails cut into her palms until blood welled in tiny crescents. She whispered aloud to no one, "They're not destroying him. They're destroying us." But silence offered no escape. She was dragged to public events by obligation, her smile trembling under the weight of 1,000 eyes. Once, outside a charity gala, a protester broke through the police line. He thrust a placard inches from her face, the words slashed in red, "No bloodline above justice." Police tore him away, but not before his spit landed at her feet. Cameras caught every second. The footage went viral within hours. Beatrice didn't speak for 3 days after that. Her sister Eugenie begged her to let it go, to disappear, to weather the storm in silence. Sarah Ferguson swore she would protect them, though her own voice was mocked whenever she tried. But Beatrice was done with silence. She paced her apartment at night, muttering to herself, scribbling words on torn pages, scratching them out, rewriting them again. She rehearsed speeches into the dark, her voice breaking, then strengthening, then breaking again. She was not just a daughter anymore. She was a soldier about to go to war. The day of her breaking point arrived like thunder. A press conference was called without palace approval. No courtiers prepared her lines. No handlers stood behind her. She arrived flanked only by her personal security, her face pale, her eyes swollen but burning. The air in the hall was thick with anticipation. Reporters surged forward, ready to devour whatever came from her trembling lips. When she stepped to the podium, the cameras erupted. Flashes blinded the room, voices overlapped in chaos. But she raised a hand, and for a moment, the storm bent to her will. Her voice cracked, but it carried. "You want to know the truth? You want to know why I said what I did?" The crowd leaned forward, hungry. Beatrice gripped the podium with both hands, her knuckles white. Because I am living inside the collapse of a family. Because I watched them strip my father, not just of his duties, but of his humanity. Because I watched the monarchy turn its back on its own to save itself. The room erupted with shouts, questions hurled like stones. But she didn't stop. Her voice rose above them, trembling, breaking, but unstoppable. They call it duty. They call it protecting the crown. But what it really is, what it has always been, is survival at any cost. And my father is the cost they chose to pay. Security guards shifted nervously as the press surged closer. Reporters shouted over one another, their questions sharp, brutal. Are you calling the monarchy a lie? Do you stand against your grandmother? Are you accusing Charles and William of betrayal? Beatrice slammed her fist against the podium, the sound cracking through the air. I am saying the monarchy would rather bury its own alive than face the truth. Gasps tore through the room. Outside, the protests swelled. The crowd roared her words back in chants. Bury its own alive. Bury its own alive. Flares burst into the air, smoke curling over the palace gates. Police locked shields, but the pressure grew violent. Glass shattered as stones rained against the barricades. Inside, Beatrice's tears returned, streaking down her face, but her voice did not waver. I loved my grandmother. I respect the crown. But I cannot stand by as the monarchy devours its own. My father may have fallen, but it is not just his fall we are witnessing. It is the fall of us all. The press room shook with chaos. Security swarmed, dragging her back as reporters lunged forward, shouting her name. Lights crashed, cords snapped, bodies collided. The feed broadcast live across the world cut in and out, but her final words carried through, echoing like thunder. If they can destroy him, they can destroy any of us. Even me. As guards forced her into the armored car outside, the mob screamed her name. Some cheered, some cursed, all of them rabid with the taste of blood. The night sky above London burned with red light from flares and fire. And somewhere deep inside Buckingham Palace, a cold truth settled like stone. Beatrice had declared war not just for her father, but against the very family she was born to serve. This was no longer silence breaking. This was rebellion. The echoes of Beatrice's words did not fade. They detonated across Britain, across the Commonwealth, across the globe. Within hours, every screen carried the image of a princess with tears streaming down her face, her fist slamming against a podium, her voice accusing the monarchy of devouring its own. The fallout was instant. Crowds swarmed Buckingham Palace, their chants rattling the gates into the early hours of morning. Torches lit the night, smoke from flares curled into the air, and banners were raised high with her words scrawled in blood-red paint, "Bury its own alive." Riot police lined the streets, their shields battered by bricks and bottles. The monarchy's fortress had not looked this vulnerable in generations. Inside the palace, silence reigned, not the silence of peace, but of dread. Charles's fury burned through closed-door meetings, his voice raised to shouts that echoed down the gilded corridors. William demanded immediate retaliation, insisting Beatrice be silenced, her words discredited, her loyalty questioned publicly. But the Queen, frail yet unflinching, shook her head. Her silence after Beatrice's declaration was its own weapon, a silence that told the world nothing, and in doing so, said everything. For Andrew, the fallout was brutal. No longer just disgraced, he became the ghost of the monarchy, haunting headlines and protests alike. Reporters camped outside his gates, capturing him pacing halls like a prisoner, his blank stare through windows splashed across front pages under captions like the Duke in Shadows. Beatrice and Eugenie were dragged into the storm. At a charity event, Beatrice faced jeers instead of applause, protesters screaming her own words back at her, they would rather bury their own alive. Even family gatherings turned cold. At Sandringham, Andrew's empty chair loomed like a specter, conversation brittle, every laugh hollow. Sarah Ferguson alone stood beside him, snapping at cameras, vowing, "You will not erase him." But Beatrice's defiance was the deeper fracture. If the Queen could strip her own son, if a princess could accuse the crown, what certainty remained? Whispers spread, no royal was safe. The monarchy responded with iron discipline. Public appearances grew fewer, sharper, militarily controlled. The balcony at Trooping the Color looked emptier, cleaner, yet colder. The age of grandeur was gone. What remained was survival. And yet, no amount of control could erase the sight of Beatrice's tear-streaked face, her trembling voice spitting defiance into the cameras. Her words echoed across the kingdom, haunting every conversation about the crown. They became graffiti on walls, chants in protests, hashtags online. They became a warning for every Windsor child, every heir, every royal bloodline. The crown will protect itself first. For Beatrice, the battle left scars she could not hide. Each public appearance carried the weight of her rebellion. Each photograph bore the reminder that she had spoken against the family machine. For Andrew, exile became permanent, his ghostly presence lingering in the corners of a dynasty that no longer claimed him. And for the monarchy itself, the fracture would never fully heal. Every Christmas at Sandringham, every summer at Balmoral, the weight of what happened lingered like smoke after a fire. The ghost of Andrew sat in every empty chair, in every pause between words. And Beatrice's defiance whispered through the halls like a warning bell. If they can destroy him, they can destroy any of us. The monarchy survived, but it survived scarred. And the world would never look at it the same way again. So what about you? Do you believe Princess Beatrice's words were an act of courage, or the spark that could unravel the monarchy forever? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because the next chapter in this royal war is only just beginning.